You know, the English we speak today didn't just appear out of thin air. It wasn't some neat, tidy process. No, the story of our language is messy. It's a tale of invasion, class warfare, and literally centuries of chaos that took a Germanic language and just smashed it together with French. Let's dive in.
Take a look at this. These are the opening lines from one of the most famous works in English literature, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Listen to that again. One that April with his shoras sote. You can almost kind of hear modern English in there, right? It feels so familiar, but the spelling is wild and some of those words are just not quite there yet.
So that's the big mystery, isn't it? What on earth happened between the Old English of Beowulf, which, trust me, is completely indecipherable to us now, and this beautiful but still kind of alien language of Chaucer? What single event could so radically change a country's own mother tongue?
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll see what English looked like from the start. Then, we'll get into the cataclysm of 1066. We'll see how two languages were forced to live together, watch a new hybrid language get born, and finally, see how it all got locked into place. Okay, first things first. We have to understand what we started with. Before a single French word entered the picture, English was a purely Germanic language, brought over by the Anglo-Saxons. And this was not a simple language, not by a long shot. Old English was what linguists call synthetic, which is really just a fancy way of saying it was jam-packed with complex grammar. Nouns had genders, kind of like in modern German or French, and words would change their endings all the time depending on how you used them in the sentence. It was a language of very strict rules. But here's where it gets really interesting. Even before the main event, things were already starting to shift. See, Viking invasions brought over Old Norse speakers. Their language was also Germanic and pretty similar to Old English. So as these two groups tried to talk to each other, all those complicated word endings just got in the way and started to get dropped. The grammar was already getting sanded down, so to speak. And that early simplification basically set the stage for the single most important event in the entire history of the English language, the year 1066. So, picture this. Before 1066, England's entire power structure, from the king all the way down, spoke English. Then, damn, William the Conqueror wins the Battle of Hastings. And, in what felt like an instant, the entire native English ruling class is wiped out and replaced by a new elite that speaks Anglo-Norman French. This created a brand new reality. All of a sudden, England has two languages, and they're split perfectly along class lines. You've got the vast majority of people, the commoners, still speaking English, but the language of the courts, of government, of power itself, was now French. So, what happens when you have a French-speaking aristocracy ruling over an English-speaking population for 300 years? Well, the languages start to bleed into each other in some fascinating ways. This, right here, is the absolute classic example of that linguistic split. The Anglo-Saxon farmer, the guy out in the fields with the animals, used the Germanic word pig, cow, sheep. But the Norman lord sitting at the dinner table, he used the French word for the meat he was being served, pork, beef, mutton. You can literally still see that class divide in our vocabulary today. It's wild. And the borrowing was just massive, especially in all the areas the new rulers controlled. Think about it. Fields like government, law, the military, even high culture and religion, they were flooded with thousands of French words, simply because that's the language the people in charge were using every single day. Fast forward about 300 years, and English starts to make a comeback as the main language of the land. But, and this is a huge but, it was not the same language. It had been fundamentally and permanently changed forever. The change was so profound, it even affected how English looked on the page. The scribes, who were trained in France, started getting rid of Old English letters like thorn and eth, which both made the th sound, and they replaced them with the simple th spelling we use today. They brought in q to replace cw, so the old word quen became our modern queen. And check out this fascinating character, the yogh. This letter, which kind of looks like a number 3 with a long tail, was an absolute Swiss Army knife. It was a holdover that could represent a whole bunch of different sounds, but under Norman influence, it eventually got pushed out in favor of letters and combinations that they were more familiar with, like U, G, and J. The alphabet itself was changing. So what was the final tally? I mean, what was the total impact of all this borrowing? Well, after that initial flood of words, the number of French-derived words in the English vocabulary settled at around an astonishing 21%. Think about that. More than one-fifth of our entire word stock had been imported from France. So the final step in this whole journey was taking this new, messy, vibrant, hybrid language and turning it into something standard. And this is where our man Geoffrey Chaucer comes back in, by making the bold choice to write his masterpiece in the dialect of London, a dialect that was this perfect mix of English grammar and a massive French vocabulary. He gave it serious prestige. He proved that this mashed-up language wasn't just for common folk. It could be the vehicle for incredible, timeless art. So Chaucer provided the cultural spark. Then the government's own administration, the Chancery, adopted a standardized version for all of its official documents. And then came the final nail in the coffin, the game changer, William Caxton's printing press. Print needed consistency, and it took that London-based standard and just spread it everywhere, cementing its spellings and its grammar for good.
And there you have it. That's the incredible journey. From a purely Germanic language through a brutal invasion, a 300-year class divide, and a massive infusion of French, a new hybrid was born and then, finally, standardized. This language, Middle English, is the direct foundation of the global language we all speak today. The story of English really shows us that language is never static. It's constantly being shaped by technology, by migration, by shifts in power. So it leaves us with one final thought. In our own age of the internet, globalization, and artificial intelligence, what are the great forces that are mashing up and reshaping English right now?